Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 318 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. A very special episode of the podcast. We have with us the Red Tank Kellen. Say hello.
Hello, hello.
We have the Green Tag Mark.
Are you going to tell me to say hello, or you trust me to say hello? Unlike Kellen.
No, please, by all means, say hello.
Hello, and I also let the record show that Kellen gave an extra hello. He was only asked to do one hello. Of course, he went overboard and
It was musical.
double helloed.
And we have with us the return of the Fandango tank, Mike DiLisio. Hello.
It's the return. Hello. And I really do appreciate that flex mentioning what episode number this is, as if having a certain number of episodes would have anything to do with the quality of the podcast. There's a lot of good podcasts out there that don't get anywhere near 300 episodes, is all I'm saying.
And they're all much worse for it.
You should know that we like to flex as often as possible.
But, okay, last time you were here, Mike, and I don't know, 20 years ago or
It
whatever.
was so long ago.
Yeah, it was so long
Our first
ago.
guest ever, I believe, right?
Yeah, I believe that's
one
correct.
of.
Yep.
I think it was. And you were not a paid professional in the board game world. Do you know what I mean? You were an
I do.
amateur, like us.
And now we're on a Zoom call, and we can see the palatial estate behind Mike that his professional board gaming has allowed him to.
I think that servant behind you is trying to get hold of you.
Well,
What?
I put this fake backdrop behind me so you think that I'm in some kind of an apartment with acoustic tiling nailed to the wall. But truly, behind me is an in-ground pool, and it is now being filled with rose water.
Wow. Luxurious.
As Nealon said, the servant with the gold dish behind you was the dead giveaway.
Well, I do what I can. I've reaped all the benefits of my great success, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm very wealthy.
Well, Mike, it's good to have you back, as always. Always lovely to hang out with you when we see you. Great to have you back on the show. This week, what we're going to be talking about is a little quick hit of mini topics, little questions that we have about the state of what we want to see coming up in the future of board games, things that we're like kind of hoping to see more of, little quick hit questions. That's in the second half. For the first half of the show, we're going to be talking about, as we usually do, the games that we've been playing. And this week, Mike has been playing Fishing, Kellen and I have been playing Ego, I've been playing Lord of the Rings, Duel for Middle-earth, and Mark has been playing Key Market, 2nd edition. Well, let's kick it off. Mike, tell us all about Fishing.
Well, Fishin' is a game by Freedom and Freeze, and it's a card game. But really, the card game that has been most exciting to me, the card game that I've really been playing nonstop, really because of the demands of folks who have been asking me to show it to them and teach it to them, is I Made You a Mixtape. This is a game that Dan Hughes and myself designed.
The hell is happening?
Is this like a...
Look,
Who let him in?
I'm here for a purpose, and that purpose is to shill the board game that myself and Dan Hughes have created called I Made You a Mixtape.
I can't believe you would do this to us, Mike. Worm your way onto the show just to promote your own stuff. It's disgusting.
Well, look,
okay.
I wish I felt bad about it. Honestly, I think had I a bit more character, then I would be feeling really ashamed and abashed right now. But really, all I am is a buzz on excitement for I Made You a Mixtape. Have I said that enough times?
No, you haven't.
Yeah.
I have questions.
Sure.
This is your first designed board game, right? From you?
Correct.
And then Dan designed Core Quest with his daughter, so this is his second design. Yes?
He had an expansion as well for that, but yes.
Oh, cool. And this is coming to Kickstarter in how long? It's the 17th. Just a reminder, we are in the future. It is the 17th.
Yes.
When is this coming to Kickstarter?
In 11 short days, Kellen. 11 days,
Oh,
October
wow.
28th. It's right around the corner, yes.
Yeah. And you got to get in on the ground floor of this pyramid, right?
You really do. There's going to be a special cachet for anybody who is backer number one. So I really think that it behooves you to get in there as early as possible and try to be the earliest backer possible. Dan and myself will be silently judging everyone based upon what backer number they are. So get in on the ground floor, like Kellen said.
Yeah, and certainly if you're not backer number one, like the lower numbers still get preference, right? No matter how high that number gets.
Yeah, don't step back just because you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because at that point, then certain numbers can say, well, look, it had stalled here for a little bit, but then when I came in and backed, it just set off this huge chain in motion where literally dozens of people have now backed this campaign. So
there are levels of prestige to be had.
Levels of prestige, indeed. That's kind of a guiding force for me in my life, is everything is built upon levels of prestige.
So, Mike, we did have the privilege of playing an earlier version of the game, but I do want to, in all seriousness, I would love to hear like your broad takes, pitch on what the game is, what it's all about, where the idea came from, all of that.
Sure, I'll keep it brief, but you played a pretty early version of it. It has changed relatively significantly. I'm trying to remember exactly which iteration you played, but basically the way the game is now is it's a I split, you choose, that being the central mechanic driving it. And it's done simultaneously now, which is definitely different from when you would have played it. So basically everyone's going to get dealt 3 cards. You're going to make a split of 2 cards and 1 card, giving it to your left neighbor. Neighbor to your right's going to do the same for you. You're going to choose which ones you're going to keep and which ones you're going to return. Your neighbor will do the same. So you're going to end up between 2 and 4 cards that you're placing into your mixtape. Each card represents a song, and it's going to have some information on it that's part of scoring. So it's going to have a length, which is going to influence the balance, which is one of the ways you score. It's going to have a genre, which is going to be a set collection type of a situation where you're getting more points based on the number of cards in a particular genre you've got. And then it's got this idea of flow, which is basically the thematic idea is that one song might flow particularly well into the next or not. And so you're going to get rewarded for how well your songs flow. It's abstracted by this piece of a unspooled cassette ribbon that kind of is on each of the cards. And so it gives you a nice visual cue on whether your songs are in flow or not. That's it. You score in those 3 ways: flow, balance, genre. Quick game. Filler game, I think, is the best way to describe it. It is a very, very simple. And as it's gone on, it's gotten more and more simple. I'll put it to you that way. The biggest changes have been taking things away.
I'm looking at the Kickstarter page right now, and I know that there's a caveat.
We have a Kickstarter page? What was that?
Yeah, I guess.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
go
we
ahead.
should say no. We should say, yeah, if you're interested, go to Kickstarter and look up "I made you a mixtape," or just Google it as I did. Just Google "I made you a mixtape Kickstarter" and get you right there. But there's a disclaimer here about the photos being prototypes, so I don't know how different the final product you think is going to be. But for what you have here, the prototype that you have here is extremely colorful and inviting to play. I could see this having great table presence. And I also noticed that, and tell me if this is going to change, the songs on the cassettes, each card is a cassette, have titles of real songs. They're like actual real song titles. Is that something that is carrying over to the final product? Do you know?
Yeah, it is. It's carrying over. The art, I'll get to both parts of the question. The art is pretty much finalized. Yeah. There's some small changes that Gary, our artist, wants to kind of implement. I think he wants to put a couple of little graphical stickers on there to kind of make them pop a little bit more. Just small little graphical details. But for the most part, the way it looks on the page is how it's going to look. For the song titles, we originally were thinking, let's go ahead and put the artist and the song on there. Plenty of games do that. You know, you've got Trivial Pursuit and Hitster, which even directs you to a Spotify list and things along those lines. But just because we are such a small project, we just didn't even want to test those waters, so to speak.
Sure.
But it seems pretty definitive that song titles are not something that you can trademark. So we went ahead and went with those to some extent for the good or to the bad. It's going to kind of remain to be seen, because while this is a game that certainly is going to be having some nostalgic kind of feel behind it, it's going to be nostalgic for the era of those songs, right? But I'm hoping that it's a universal enough idea of making a collection of songs for somebody, whether it's on a Spotify playlist or on a mixtape cassette or CD or whatever might resonate for you, that, you know, you're going to be able to have some fun with that. And who knows, if it does well, I should say, then I can get some cultural consultants like the 3 of you who could clue me into earlier decades of music, or later, later decades of music. I'll leave the early stuff to me. And I can have a more up-to-date type of pack of song cards.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, whatever gaps there are to be filled, expansion, baby. Just crank it out.
I'd love to see it. See it.
And Mike, I understand that you and Dan have re-recorded all of these songs as a bonus to all backers. Is that right?
We have. It's a very simple rendition, though. We wanted to go strip back. So it's just me on vocals and mouth harp and Dan on a mandolin. And
perfect.
He's never actually played the mandolin before, but he got surprisingly close to some of the melodies. So I was impressed.
And then you put it through the Alvin and the Chipmunks sped up version, right? It's like an Alvin thing where everybody's like squeaking.
No, that's a misconception, actually. That's actually how I sing. From a very early age, I sang like that. So, yeah.
I just wanted to hear about fishing.
It's a really good game, actually. Very good game.
So if you're interested, we're going to definitely put a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. Thank you for telling us about it, Mike. And we will have that link in the show notes for anyone that wants to check out the campaign and back it on the 28th of October.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak about it on this most illustrious of Golden Geek Award platforms. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have. Okay, let's move on to Ego. Callan.
You really shouldn't have, Mike. All right, so speaking of Kickstarter games, we got a chance to play a early version of a new game coming to Kickstarter. In fact, it is on Kickstarter as of 2 days ago, and this is from Bitewing Games, maybe the only people in the world who love Reiner Knizia more than we do. And the game that we got to play is called Ego. And if you want, you can see Neelan and I playing this game with Monique and Naveen of Before You Play on their YouTube channel in the playthrough of the game that may or may not be on the Kickstarter page. We were paid to participate in that playthrough. We were also sent a pseudo review copy or preview copy, and these thoughts are our own, and I promise I have thoughts. Ego is a reimplementation of Beowulf the Legend, a Reiner Knizia game that has a lot of fans and a lot of detractors. I played Beowulf the Legend for the first time within the last year and immediately talked about it on the podcast in very positive, effusive terms. I said, Mark, Neelan, this game is stupid, but it's our kind of stupid, and we're going to have fun playing it. And after playing Ego, very confidently, I can say that we will just play Ego when we get together this year to play games again together, because it has improved upon the formula of Beowulf in a lot of really key ways. Ego stands for Extraterrestrial Greeting Organization. Okay.
Obviously. You didn't even explain that.
I'm following.
The game is a push your luck auction game with some light negotiation elements that uses the Taj Mahal sort of auction system, quote unquote. Essentially, you're gathering cards with different icons on them, and then you're going into a series of auctions where as you drop out of the auction, you are staking your claim as to what kind of reward you will get. So if you're the first one who has to drop out of an auction, you're going to get last pick of the available rewards, and going down and down and down. Except sometimes the auction is all bad. Like no one wants any of it. So you're competing for the least reward in that case. The other big wrinkle of the game that brought ire to Beowulf the Legend that has been tuned here is the ability to just top deck cards if you don't have them or you don't want to use your own cards. And you're like, so, okay, in this auction, quote unquote, we're worried about, and I have these resources up in the rule book because I'm always like, you know how it's like, oh, it's purple and blue or gifts or intrigue. There's literally
this is
one.
This is a Knizia game. Please use the thematic names. Please.
Yeah, it's persuasion. Yeah. But if you look at the icon, it is an open mouth with magic symbols next to it. So open mouth magic is my preferred name for that resource. This is how we're negotiating with aliens, presumably. So basically, if the auction is for gifts and persuasion, you can top deck an amount of cards listed on that auction. And if you get two of those symbols, gifts or persuasion, that's a total success, and you don't take any ire from the aliens. If you get none, you are dropped out of the auction and you lose, quote unquote, but you don't get any ire from the aliens either. If you get one success and one fail, you gain some bad juju with the aliens that at the end of the game gets turned into for a lot of negative victory points if you have too many of them. So essentially taking a system that was pretty controversial in Bale of the Legend, trying to keep the same level of dramatic tension in it, but also making it a little bit more fair no matter what the outcome is. In reality, the game is still a series of these auctions where you're getting cards, you're looking at each other. It's the same exact thing that I love about Taj Mahal, except without all the Euro where you have to think ahead. Okay? All you have to do is say, Nealon, I got a huge hand of cards. I'm willing to commit all of them. You better drop out now. And then Nealon says, surely you won't do that. You're not an idiot. And then he plays his card. And then I say, surely I will do that because my ego is bigger than yours. Okay? That is why the game name is so appropriate, because no matter what, you just use your ego to win the game, because just never drop out is my rule for ego. I think this is very smart. I'm very excited about this game. I think turn to turn, the fun is there. I think there's a level of stupidity to the whole affair that you sort of have to acknowledge to have fun with it. But once you've acknowledged it, turn to turn, like I can't think of a game that I've played in the last few years that's as much, it's just on the table, yelling at each other, don't do that, I'm going to do that, you shouldn't do that, back and forth. The game's over in less than an hour. Very, very good time for me with Ego. Nealon, what do you think of Ego, having never played Beowulf the Legend?
Yeah, I think that you've hit all of my touch points, really. I should say that Taj Mahal is my favorite Reiner Knizia game. That is definitely the right touch point for the sort of game this is, in terms of, I think one of the things you maybe even understated is you do see the whole track laid out before you in Taj Mahal. And if you did really want to, you could plan ahead and be like, oh, I'm going to need cards early for this type, I'm going to need cards late for the middle, and so on. You could do all of that. But at the same time, it's shorter, lighter, and stupider than Taj Mahal. And I think that is going to be a net positive for a lot of people. For me personally, I adore Taj Mahal, so it would be really hard for this to say that this is a better game to me, but it's in that vein. And if you're approaching what Taj Mahal is doing, I'm immediately interested. I liked so much of what this is doing just in the vein of being a shorter game that you can just take a lot less seriously, because half the time you are just top taking your way to victory, and that's both funny and ridiculous, and I think it worked in both of those directions equally well.
Yep. I think the Taj Mahal reference is interesting, right? Because Taj Mahal is that central mechanism, but then applied to a Euro planning
very
game.
dry, very deterministic procedural game. This sort of takes off a lot of those, I would say, more Eurofied, more brain burny, for lack of a better word, elements, and just adds silliness and fun on top of it.
Yep, and I think that it's closer to Zoo Vadis. I wouldn't say the negotiation is explicit, but there definitely is. Nealon and I at one point were trying to both drop out collectively together, and it's which reward do you want? Which reward do you want? We don't need to waste our cards, because then before you play is going to us. See what I'm saying? They tried to pit us against each other in hopes that they would get the win, and so it was fun. It was above the table. Mark, have either of you played Beowulf the Legend? I know you haven't played Ego. No one would send you guys a copy of Ego. I just want to be clear. We got Ego. You did not. But the old one, you guys played it?
I have played it, yes.
I have not wolfed nor egoed.
That sounded like a ringing endorsement there, Mike, for Beowulf.
No, don't read into that. No, I enjoyed Beowulf, but from what I can remember of playing it and what Kellen has described, it sounds like you said net positive. Can I posit a quick theory that you can cut out if you're scrapped for time?
Sure.
I think that it's clear that Reiner Knizia is having his time in the sun again, right? He was persona non grata for many, many years. Now his games are in the spotlight again. And I think it's because his games, in many ways, are the polar opposite of what is happening in modern board games right now. And that's for the good and the bad. Complexity for complexity's sake is the exact opposite of the design ethos of Reiner Knizia.
For sure.
See what I'm getting at?
Absolutely. No, 100%.
And so I think there are people that are starting to, they still love their crunchy, overly complex Euros, but you can get such a powerful experience around the table in 2 pages of rules. consistently. He's been doing this for years.
Yeah.
It wasn't in fashion for the longest time, and I think now almost as a counterpoint to what modern hobby gaming is doing. All right, there you go. No way to prove it.
No, I think
Agreed,
that's
100%.
super valid.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to come on here and show us up with your professional opinions. We're all
Look, I'm a very
we buoyed
important
you up.
person, Kellen. This is what I have
scratched-
on the screen.
We scratched your back at the beginning, and now you're us.
Fair point. Fair point.
I am super excited by Ego. I will be backing it on Kickstarter. No questions asked. We are getting together to do BarageCon, which is just the four of us hanging out. And it is number one on the list of games I want to play with Mark Nealon and Christina. I think getting this game in under an hour with so many highs and lows is just the right kind of performative that we'll have a great time playing. And that is Ego, being brought to Kickstarter by Bitewing Games. We'll leave a link in the show notes.
So I am going to be talking about The Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth. This is by Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala.
Objection! Nealon,
Yes.
is this game related to one of the top 5 most overrated games of all time, according
Okay.
to Nealon Niker Orange
Okay.
Take from episode
Hang on.
317 of the Board Game Barrage podcast?
Hang on. I knew this was coming. I knew I was going to have to find some way to talk my way out of this. Here we go. Yes, this is a re-implementation of Seven Wonders Duel, which I had on my list.
Don't use the Gungan voice. They're gonna kill you.
Look, I think I said this on the episode, and maybe I didn't, but I actually really like Seven Wonders Duel. I fell into a trap of thinking that our audience didn't, and I think I was definitely taken to task for having that opinion. So, and correctly, I think Seven Wonders Duel is great. It's not a strong reflection on the rest of Seven Wonders, which I think is pretty middling on the whole, but Seven Wonders Duel I find quite good. And I will say, just to
how are you caving so comprehensively so quickly? You went from calling it one of the most
because I'm being 100% genuine. That I did not pick that game because I think it's overrated. That is a genuine, true fact.
that makes sense.
I have Seven Wonders Duel. I like it. No. We've even discussed this. I think because I think part of the reason, Mark, is that you've often said to me how much you dislike Seven Wonders Duel,
and I am right in that opinion.
That was kind of yeah,
that is a correct opinion. But no,
this is not.
I just want to apologize formally. I just want to apologize formally for thinking that you thought it was overrated just because you picked it as one of the most overrated games of all time. That was my mistake.
Yeah, I know. That is I don't know why you would think that. That's a crazy thing to have come away from. But this is not Seven Wonders Duel. This is definitely, I would say, 80% of Seven Wonders Duel. But I do think the changes that Cathala and Bowser have made are very much in line with what Cathala's been doing with a lot of his recent two-player games. Like the thing that we saw with Splendor Duel, where you take a game that is very good on its own and you make it much more cutthroat in the intensely two-player version. Now, obviously, Seven Wonders Duel is already a two-player game, but what they've done is they've refined and increased that sort of adversity, that very intense push and pull. So in Seven Wonders Duel, you had 2 immediate win conditions that could trigger in the middle of the game, and otherwise the game went to victory points at the end of the game. And, that sucks. Who cares about victory points in a game that feels that intense tug of war throughout? In all of the games I've played of Lord of the Rings, Duel for Middle-earth, it's always ended in one of those 3 immediate in-game victory conditions. There is technically, if you get all the way to the end, then whoever holds the most territory wins, but that did not happen in my plays of it, which is exactly what you'd want. You want the game to be on that knife's edge if someone's about to win on one of these 3 competing objectives, and if you oversteer on one, then suddenly they're going to knife you with the other, and that feels really tense at all times. And if I've not already kind of given it away a little bit, there is an area control component to this. There is a map of Middle-earth that you're putting troops out. You're moving those troops depending on cards you acquire to move them across the map. And that one win condition is now just having presence in all the 7 realms. Now, there's not much of a battle system there. It's just very much if your troops occupy the same space as another troop, they kill each other, very tit for tat. But it does feel like you're trying to sort of weed your way around control of this map while you're also trying to draft cards, which in the same way, similar to Seven Wonders Duel, if you get 6 of all the different factions, you'll win that way. And then the other track that they've added is kind of this cutesy little hobbits racing to Mordor to kill the ring while the Nazgul are chasing them on that track. And if the Nazgul catch up with the hobbits, then the Sauron player wins. Otherwise, the hobbits player wins if they make it all the way to Mordor. So there are nice little thematic touches like that, make this feel like a Lord of the Rings game. I will say, because I have to say this before I close it out, the art in this game is gorgeous. All the art is done by Vincent Dutray. It is bright, it is colorful, it's vibrant. We've seen like 100 different versions of Lord of the Rings art, but I don't know that I've ever seen it look this vibrant and colorful, at least not in a very, very long time. I mean, I'm just going to grab the lid real quick. Like, look at that. Look at that cover, Kellen. Tell me that's not gorgeous.
Tell him, Kellen. Go ahead. Tell him.
Tell me.
Nealon. You know how there are products that are like art, you know?
Yeah.
And then products that are made because market research was done?
Absolutely.
Which one do you think this is?
Ooh, I think this one is art. Art. Good question.
Interesting, Nealon.
Damn fine question, Kellen. Damn fine question.
Interesting that your mind went there.
I do want to say that, yes, of course, this is the Lord of the Rings themed game. I am predisposed to like it on that basis alone. I do genuinely think, like, I wouldn't be saying any of this if I did not genuinely think that the way that the mechanics have been changed are all for the better. They've taken a game that I like a fair bit and they've just twisted the dials and everything in a way that just makes it feel more attuned to like what I want from a two-player game. This does feel tense a lot of the times. This does have that sort of energy of you sort of very cleverly trying to like look at the cards on the table, decide which ones are going to take you down certain paths, which ones are going to expose other cards to other players in order to like wheel yourself in the direction you need to be able to win. It works really well in that regard. That's all I have to say about Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth.
Well, speaking of Seven Wonders Duel, how does this compare just in terms of like playtime and complexity, just on those two parameters alone?
I would say on both of those counts, probably the same. I think by virtue of not having victory points, I think that obviously simplifies the win conditions a little bit.
Yeah.
But, the mechanics are largely the same in terms of like how you acquire resources, how you spend those to get cards, how each of those resources are contributing towards each of your victory conditions. I would say maybe there's a tiny bit more of complexity because the one major mechanic, this area control map, is modified by the existence of these tiles that you can draft instead of a card. And those kind of have like special powers associated with them, like increased costs. That's barely a complexity bump, but it is at least a little bit slight. That's one more thing to have to think about. That isn't just the card array. But as far as Seven Wonders Duel with expansions goes, I can't really speak to that all much, but it seems probably in the same ballpark. As if you can imagine a game of Seven Wonders Duel with maybe an expansion or two tacked on, that feels about the level of complexity. So not dramatically different at all.
How does it compare play length and complexity to War of the Ring?
Dramatically different. I will say that. Yes.
Okay, well, at least it has that going for it. All right.
Yeah, we're talking about it. I mean, it also, we're talking about like a 20-minute game. It's breezy. You'll be playing multiple games of this back to back. That is Lord of the Rings, Duel for Middle-earth by Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala. Mark, key market.
Yeah, now that we've talked about games that are so hot, many of them haven't even come out yet, let us hit the brakes. Let's put it in reverse, back up, all the way back to 2010, I played Key Market 2nd Edition, which, truth be told, that edition actually came out in 2019, published by R&D Games. Key Market is part of Breeze's Key series of games, the most famous of which being Keyflower, but also including Keyflow, Keythedral, etc., with the upcoming Key Side soon to be added to the mix. As far as I can tell, aside from the key prefix, the only things that these games share is the art style, which I like. Very bright and colorful and done by Richard Breeze's sister Juliet, so that's also a cool little fact. So there's the art style and the fact that they all have this medieval setting, but that seems to be about it. Actually, did Key to the City London even have a medieval setting? I can't remember, but that might be an exception.
No, I think it was modern day London, right?
Yeah, okay, so that's the one exception in terms of the medieval theming. But again, not much tying them together in general as it is. Well, actually, there is one more thing that the games share. They all are, at least of the ones I've played, which include the aforementioned Keyflower, Keyflow, Keeper, and Key to the City London, and now Key Market. They all are pretty novel, at least in some respects. They sort of give me the feeling that they were designed by someone who loves and knows board games, but who might not necessarily play a ton, and therefore goes into game design relatively fresh. They don't feel super derivative, and Key Market is no exception. This is despite the fact that, at its core, Key Market is a fairly straightforward economic resource conversion game where you're looking to grow crops and sell them for a profit for money, which is both the currency of the game and the victory points. I don't always love it when a game does this, when it makes the currency also the way that you win the game, but it works here. One of the reasons is for a game that plays, and I'll say unusually, when you are making decisions in these novel spaces, it's easy to assign values to what you're trying to figure out. This action, for example, cost me 5 gold, which I know is 5 victory points. Is it worth it? Sort of thing when you're trying to figure out what you're doing. Let's go over how the game works very briefly. You start by, as a group, creating the main board that you're all going to be playing on. Each player takes a 3x3 grid of spaces and attaches it to a previously placed grid, and that's your game board. This makes for an extremely tight board. For a game where you have up to 5 or 6 workers, although that is rare, on the board at a time, this amounts to, in a 3-player game, potentially 18 of the total of 27 spaces being filled by workers. So it can be a very, very tight game board. Again, this really works in this game as it makes for not only a really tight board, but also narrows, again, the decision space in a game that's probably throwing a few things at you that you haven't seen before. So let's touch on that real quick. So the game is broken up into 2 years of 4 seasons each. So 8 total seasons, 8 total rounds, you might think of them as. Each season is broken up into 3 parts. In the first part, you're moving your workers around into spaces on the board and producing crops. The way you move your workers is unique, and any movement comes with a cost in terms of money, aka again points. But it's very important to note that for this, and in all phases of the game, everything that you're doing, every action that you're taking and considering is broken down on a very easy to comprehend player aid that each of the players have. It's in this first phase known as the farming phase, where you're going to be able to train your workers in one of the guilds. So this is another big aspect of the game. Every game, you're going to pick a number of guilds out of like a stack of them that come with the game to play with, and they act as a way to give yourself special powers unique to yourself or unique scoring opportunities, personal scoring opportunities. And the way you do that is by placing one of your meeples on these guild cards, and later in the game, potentially moving them up one of these guild cards, which give you often better powers or better scoring opportunities. And so that makes up the first of the 3 phases of the game, the farming phase. The second phase of the 3 is the market phase, where you're going to be selling the goods that you've been producing and perform what are called guild actions. I won't go over everything here in terms of guild actions, but I'll just say I really love the way that the market phase is handled. Before it starts, everyone's going to secretly assign which goods, you sort of hide the goods that you've been producing behind your screen, and you're going to secretly select which goods you're going to be selling, and you're going to hide them in your hand and then simultaneously reveal them. Then those items, the ones that you've revealed, are the only ones that can be sold in this phase, and they can't be used for any other actions. You're now committing them to be sold in this market phase, which is important because there are other actions you can take in this phase that require those goods to perform. There's other things like moving the players up to the guild. There's a lot of different things you can do that require using your resources, but when you commit them to market, you must sell them in the market. Well, that whole thing isn't really a big deal in and of itself. The way you actually even sell to the market is really simple. Every time you sell something, the price goes down. Every time you buy something, the price goes up. It's done in a very simple, linear way. But this commit to sell choice is just a really quick thing that is added to the game that adds to the decision space in a way that I hadn't really remembered seeing before in other games. So that's the market phase, the second of the 3 phases. The final phase is a cleanup market adjustment phase. Again, really simple, straightforward. And then you do it again. I haven't mentioned a lot of the stuff, obviously, and how the game works. There's the fact that you can retire workers, which take them out of the game, but also means you no longer have to pay them, which is something you have to do, and gives you a bonus for retiring them as well. There's certainly a few more things, and I have to admit, this game didn't necessarily even knock my socks off by any means, but I love how fresh it felt. The fact that so many games nowadays feel like others, it can be helpful. You know, you're sometimes nowadays you'll read a rule book, you'll get to a section, you realize you basically already know where this is going, you've seen it somewhere else, and you can sort of skim through that part of the rule book, and it helps to build a lexicon to get through teaching games faster. But it's really refreshing when you play a game that throws ideas at you that you really haven't seen too often. Even when those ideas are couched in things that you've seen a million times before. In the case of Key Market, again, resource management, economic buy and sell, but done in a way that forces you to approach the problems differently. And getting over the hurdle that you sometimes get when you play a novel game that forces you to keep referring to the rule book. You know, that thing where, yes, sometimes you play a game that feels fresh, but it's so different that you find yourself often referring to rule books and how does this work or all this stuff. The fact that this is doing that, but all the rules sort of fit on a really small, very clear player aid card is just great. So I really like Key Market. It's maybe a touch longer than many midweight games on the market are nowadays. But when I'm next trying to figure out which game in that midweight range I want to play, it's really attractive to think about playing this rather than a samey feeling midweight Euro, at least in my book. So anyway, that is Key Market second edition by R&D Games. I should also clarify that this is the second edition. I never played the first edition, but from my understanding, the only differences are sort of balancing issues. I don't know how unbalanced the first edition was, but yeah, that is Key Market second edition from 2019.
Mark, can you give me a hot take? Rank all the key games you've ever played, top to bottom. You have 10 seconds. I'll do the Jeopardy music. Do, do, do. I think this is
Key
Jeopardy music.
Market,
Do, do.
Key Flow, Key Flower, Keeper, Key to the City London.
Key Market's your number one?
I think so. I really liked it. I mean, maybe it's the recency bias. Maybe Key Flow. I don't know.
Detect the gusto.
I was never.
Description.
Did you say Key Flow at number 2?
Yeah, I think so. Again, that's another game.
That's
It's a card game, right?
Yeah, that's a card game.
That's
yeah.
actually that's the one I've been the most curious about because I feel like Key Flower I like but don't love, but Key Flow seemed intriguing to me.
Yeah, Key Flower, I appreciate it, and I like how sort of brutal it is. I've never been as big a fan as a lot of people are. Again, I love the uniqueness of it, but I've never been a huge fan. But again, all the games by R&D Games are interesting. They have like a Friedman Friese sort of quality to them where they just feel unique.
And we can all agree that Key to the City London could not have handled its components worse, correct? That's some of the worst use of... We have to put all these roads down, and then we have to pick all these roads back up to flip the tile to put the roads back down. I'm shocked that actually got through because Richard Breed's been doing it for a long time, and I haven't seen anything like that in his other games. So had to be a better one.
Fiddly.
I think it's like these manufacturers, they get a good relationship, and Panda comes out, and they're like, hey, dude, we've got a ton of pink sticks. We got to get rid of them. You know what I mean? They're expiring next year. Can you help us?
The influence of big stick in the industry, I'm telling you, it's becoming an increasing problem over the years.
That's what's happening. And you're going to confirm that on the record as a professional board game critic, right?
Well, look, let me tell you, I'm willing to just put myself on the line for things that I have absolutely no corroborating evidence for.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so before we get on with the rest of the show, we do have a little bit of business here. We did a draft 2 weeks ago, and we do, unfortunately, have to announce the results of that draft.
I
The other two just picked, their faces picked up. Wow, as soon as you said unfortunately, the other two just shot to attention.
This is for our overrated games draft that I've already been eating humble pie on this episode. But unfortunately, I am also in last place for the draft with 25% of the vote. Second place goes to Mark with 23% of the vote.
Boom.
And with 42%, Kellen takes the lead.
You guys thought that you could outdraft me on most overrated game?
This
This is my bread and butter.
Yeah.
This is the reward for being the spiciest. You know what I mean? You guys went Little Care Bear, and I just started knifing people's favorites right to the jugular. I was too coward to hit Terraforming Mars. I'm going to say that now in the light of day, but I hit everything else.
I don't remember if I said this on the main podcast or on the bonus episode, but I believe I promised that if Kellen won, I would do a book report on Twilight Imperium book. And so I did say that. So I'm a man of my word. I will be reading one of the Twilight Imperium books, and I will do a book report on a future bonus episode. That is a promise.
Yeah, the lore, the complexity. Oh,
Can you include a diorama with your book report?
Sure.
I'll insist he does.
A shoebox diorama?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, thank you all for voting. There was a really big turnout for this vote. I think a lot of you were very eager to tell us what you thought about our overrated games picks. As we promised, one winner will be walking away with a $100 gift card just for voting. And that person, your email address starts with an M, ends with an S at gmail.com. Check your email. We will be letting you know how you can redeem that. Thank you so much for voting and for listening. One more quick thing in the middle here is that it is officially Ghost Turkey season. If you're not familiar with what Ghost Turkey is, it's our version of a Secret Santa board game gift exchange type thing. It happens around Halloween and Thanksgiving, which is why we call it Ghost Turkey. And if you want to take part, you can go over to our Discord, which is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Look for the Ghost Turkey channel. There'll be a pinned message there that tells you how to register. This is like absolutely one of my favorite things that happens in the year. It's probably my favorite community event, one of my absolute highlights. There's so much fun giving and receiving, giving and sending and receiving gifts all around the world, sending anonymous messages. It's just sheer joy. And by the time this episode goes out, you'll only have a few days left to register. So please hurry on over to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and look for the Ghost Turkey channel. Let's get onto the main topic, which is going to be a series of questions of just things that we want to see more of in the industry, in the board gaming hobby. We're just going to go around the room, tackle these one by one, just get a little quick taste of people's thoughts on these. Let's start with the first one, which is a game or mechanic that we'd like to see more of in the future. Oh, no, sorry, I'll do that.
Okay, Neon.
A game or mechanic that we'd like... Oops, sorry.
Neon. Okay.
Yeah, hello.
It's the wrapper, okay?
Yeah.
There's a thematic wrapper to all the questions.
Yeah.
We want to see, you know what I mean? You're like, little bitty questions. Who knows what they have to do with each other? Things we want to see, collectively. We assembled the team. We got Fandango, we got Mike, okay? So now we have paid cachet. Things we want to see. We can shape the industry right now. And you're like, oh, it'll bitty questions, and then we'll off and get... No, things we want to see.
I see. So yeah, so we are pioneers. We are like paving the way for the future of the hobby. Visionaries. I like that. I like that. Yeah, that is a fair point. I did not give this the gravitas it deserved. We are right now defining the very future as we speak. Please bear with us. Bear with our thoughts as we pave this golden path.
They're so deep.
The golden road. Wait, what's
the golden path? Neelan, now you're speaking my language.
There it is.
Kellen, what department do you work at Activision?
Marketing.
There you go.
Whoa, here we go.
You go.
But yeah, let's jump in with the first one of these we have, which is a game or mechanic that we would like to see in the future. Something that's been like sitting in the back of our mind. Why has there not been a board game about this? Mike, do you want to kick us off with yours?
Well, I'm going to. I hope that I answered this question in the spirit, because when Kellen posited these questions, he had a little example for this first one. I think your example is something along the lines of Stefan Feld designs his take on a space game. So I went in that spirit. All right. So this is going to sound very glib, but it's not meant to be. I would love to see Cole Worley design a push your luck dice game. And
interesting.
I know that the surface level of that would be, just somebody that's doing something that's the opposite of what they normally do. But it's not necessarily because of that. It's because, and you may even think you'd be wasting his talents on a push your luck dice game. But my thing is, what I appreciate about Cole as a designer is that he so often kind of turns board game conventions on their head, right? You have... Mark was talking about it earlier in the episode, where you have kind of this scaffolding because you've played so many games. You might have a head start because, like, okay, I have an idea about how worker placement set collection games go, right? So you've got that to build on. What Cole Worley seems to do is turn those on their ear. And so, you're used to a particular type of game being approached a particular way because that's the way it's mostly done. And then you'll play Cole's game and it's like, oh my gosh, whoa, what's going on here? This almost doesn't even feel like this type of a game. And so I would really be interested to see how he would approach something that is so stripped down. You know what I mean? That mechanic is basically what it is. And dice are a great randomizer component in board games. I think even more than cards, personally, when you're going for pure push your luck. I would really be interested to see how he would approach that.
Let me piggyback off of Mike here, because I have the same sort of vibe in my answer. I'd like to see the guys at Splotter doing a light card game for the same sort of reasons, with the idea of like playing games that are very samey, and people, again, who approach, as I mentioned earlier with Brees, and we've talked about with Friedman and Knizia, even to a big respect. I'd love to see the Splotter folks who are always coming out with these usually quite heavy, but very interesting, unusual games. I would like to see their take on a lighter, smaller card game, something again stripped down, as Mike sort of alluding to with Whirly and a push your luck dice game. I'd love to see their take on something that is unusual for their space, but might illuminate some interesting things about light card game design that maybe we haven't seen otherwise.
And I think that's always something I always like to see, which is designers just flexing outside of their comfort zones and doing something that is entirely different for them. Because I also do think that is often when you get some of the most interesting designs where you just almost have this like completely outside perspective that just like thinks about the genre in a way that the people that are really deep in it often can't, because they're so, like Mark had said about Key Market, like so familiar with certain mechanics that sometimes it just takes a little bit of a stepping outside of that thing to like come up with something like truly inventive. Yeah, I love that. I love both of those ideas. That's great.
It's like Arcs, people love the dice combat in it, and they're like, oh, this is so clever. So it's like, get to just that. Mark, I'm trying to remember, has Splotter had a game with like interesting card play that's surrounded by dozens of complex Euro systems?
Yeah,
I like Splotter games. That's not a hot take.
Okay, it sounds like I felt like I might be stepping into a trap there. They have a lot of games I haven't played. They have a lot of games, to be fair, that I haven't played that were like obscure early Splotter games. I think most of their newer designs could be grouped into like quite heavy economic games. I think most of the recent stuff would fall under that category.
Interesting. Okay, my answer to this question is just based on some of the ruminating I've been doing. I played Diplomacy recently and had just a really bad time because it's so mean and brutal with the people that I was playing with. Even though I love that, it's also like 10 hours long. So what I'm chasing, and after playing Ego, it's like a sub 2 hour, 6-player shared infrastructure-y a la like brass game. So it's like almost, it's on the way to Diplomacy, but it's not Diplomacy because the only mechanic in Diplomacy is you. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you...
That is the mechanic listed on BGG, right?
Yes, that's confirmed.
I remember when Jeff Egglestein was talking about putting that out there. Yeah, right.
It's like, in some ways, Last Light is somewhere there, but it doesn't have as much on the board play. It's a little bit more concerned with the cards and the power-ups you get. So I want it to be more on the table, more, Neelan, I want you to use my warehouse because then we're both going to get this. And then everybody's engaged. But again, we're like hard capped at this like 2 hour limit. There was something about Ego, and maybe this game exists, right? Like it may just be my lack of awareness of it. But
I was going to say that it's not unlike like Imperial to some extent, but even that maybe feels like a little bit too far in like the heaviness direction.
Yes. Yeah, like if Imperial could be cut in half from a time perspective. Yeah, like Imperial's a great one, or cut in half and then the mechanisms are just like, it's like you could almost talk someone into, it's like you have this pendulum, right? Where it's like either you're playing Dead Last or Lifeboats or Zuvadis, or you're playing Imperial 2030.
Right, yeah.
Like where are we on the road to that? And just something that I could convince closer to non-gamers, work coworkers, people to engage with, but it isn't just like get the board game, and it's more about the people involved. And like that's, and again, maybe I'll take after Mike, first paid, well, I got to have a paid job in the board game space first to sort of, kind of buoy me up. Then I design the game, and then I go shill it everywhere humanly possible. Maybe we can bring it to life.
You can pitch it to Massive Asterisk, my publishing company.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd be
this is a live
happy
pitch.
to
Here we go.
to look at it as I'd be happy to take you on as an unpaid intern, is what I'm saying.
Oh wow, that's my pitch.
So I went a little bit more boring, but in a specific direction here, which is like thematically speaking. So the example that Mike mentioned that Kellen gave about a space game by Feld is not that dissimilar from where I could have went with this, which is I want a specific style of space game. I think that the space games that largely exist are kind of 4X adjacent, building your civilizations, build spaceships, attack each other, that sort of thing. But there's a whole genre of video game space games that are kind of more in line with kind of like a civilization. There's this stuff like Stellaris where you have like basically your space empire, you're managing resources, you're kind of managing your civilization, you're establishing contact with other races, or slowly branching out in a way that kind of feels a little bit more akin to something kind of like the video game space. The examples I go to are stuff like Star Control, Mass Effect, that sort of thing. Kind of a more first contact oriented, reaching out to other civilizations type game. So that's something that feels a little bit more maybe negotiation oriented and more economy oriented than something that is strictly like space battling. And that I always turn to who I think is kind of the master of like big bucks video game adaptations, who we've not heard from in a very long time, Vlad Chvatil, as the person I would like to see tackle something like that. I think Mage Knight is a really good touch point. The guy who made Codenames, exactly. But, something like a Mage Knight is actually a really, really good touch point for this, where it's kind of more just about you existing in a space and moving out and making contact with other, in the case of Mage Knight, other like towns and cities to like grow your empire, as it were.
It's interesting you used Mage Knight as your touch point when you didn't use Through the Ages as your touch point, because it sounds like the game you're looking for is closer to Through the Ages in space. You know what I mean?
It's definitely. I think it's definitely in that vicinity because, Through the Ages obviously being, very heavily based on the Civilization video game.
Sure.
That is very much kind of the touch point I'm going to. And, I actually think the reason like Vlada feels like a natural fit for this is he clearly loves those video games as well. So I suspect he has affinity for a lot of the same sorts of video games that I do. And it just seems like it would be such a great fit.
That's interesting.
I think, Neil, what's so interesting is how you sort of take the macro or the micro view, right? Because one of your favorite games, Sidereal Confluence, is like alien races trading, which is almost like one subcomponent
one chunk of it
of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you sort of like go outwards, and there's games that are just focused on sort of the trading and like the Merchants of Venus style, like going around from different places, which I think about when I think about those space games like Freelancer and
Sure.
again, but then you're talking about sort of that even more macro, this is my civilization, that's
like
your
the
civilization.
Big space empire type view, exactly.
Totally. But that there's a bunch of games that fulfill like different versions of that for you.
Exactly.
And then, when you kind of get all the way out to like Twilight Imperium, I don't know, it's just an interesting premise. Like, what view do you want? And you're
absolutely, totally
targeting a specific one.
I think actually almost to some extent to good reason, because I think board games are kind of really hard at handling that scale in a way that doesn't feel like you just have a huge amount of cards. But I also think board games can be really good at taking a certain perspective and abstracting it in a way that feels good with certain mechanics. And that's the problem I'd like to see someone. And, I'm sure that this is something that people have maybe attempted and failed at, but I am pleasantly surprised by like seeing genres of video games suddenly come to life in a board game in a way that's like, why did someone not do this sooner? Yeah, just seems like something that could exist and for whatever reason doesn't. Okay, let's move on to a trend that we'd like to see more of in the board game space. Who wants to jump in on this one?
I started the last one. I'll go ahead and start this one.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is a pretty broad topic, but I think I can narrow it to what I really am trying to get at. I would love to see artists, illustrators, graphic designers getting equal billing with game designers. It's starting to happen where it's becoming more common that the artist name is on the box. It's not ubiquitous, though. I mean, there's still plenty of board games that don't have the illustrator on the same level as the board game designer. And I'm talking both, not just in credits, right, which is what I was saying a moment ago, their name on the box at the equal level with the designer, all of that. But I'm also talking about ownership, because I'm not obviously a board game artist or illustrator, but you kind of hear things, when you're in the know like the four of us are. And I do get the impression that most artists are hired to do a game, right? They do the artwork for that game, a certain number of art assets. And then that art no longer belongs to the artist anymore. It goes to that game. And it seems like to me that designers usually have a contract for a particular number of years where you've got this design until this contract runs out. And then I can take this design and I can go somewhere else with it. I don't see why that's not the same case with artists. If it isn't. And now I could be completely mistaken on this, but I don't get the impression that most artists keep ownership of that art. If I'm wrong, then this is all neither here nor there, but I don't get the impression that's the case. And the reason why I think this is important is because I'm of the opinion, and this could be a hot take, I'm on the right podcast for it, that artists right now in the board game space are, if not equally important to the success and sales of a game, they're really damn close. If your game has stupendous art, graphic design, it's going to get the attention of people, especially in the space now where so many games are crowdfunded. And I just don't think that they are considered on the same level. You were joking about the levels of prestige earlier in the podcast. I don't think that they typically are on the same level of prestige as designers. There are a few notable exceptions. Obviously Vincent Dutray, Ian O'Toole, the Micho, Jackie Davis. There are certain artists that have kind of that name recognition. But I don't think that they have yet gotten the kind of recognition / financial incentives that maybe some designers have. There you go.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is I had considered for the slot talking about just how much I like seeing how splashy board game art has become. Big box covers that have just very bold, bright, colorful artwork on the front. And I think that this is the corollary to that, of saying that okay, yeah, if we're going to go out of our way to put art and artists' work on the forefront of box covers, then yeah, we absolutely should be crediting and attributing some of that success of the game sales to those artists. What I actually ended up with on mine isn't exactly the same, but it is kind of in the same ballpark, which is to say that it's something that is not about the mechanics or design of the game, but more about the feel of the game. And one of the things I talk about a lot, and I think almost as a running joke, is tactility as a board game thing, the way that pieces look and feel. And I feel like that's a trend that I feel started with Splendor, moving into Azul, and is becoming more and more and more prominent, of just having very satisfying feeling pieces, and having the couple of words I've thrown around in the past, Toy Factor and things like that, just games that feel very pleasant to interact with. Because one of the things I kind of think I love about the medium is that this is one of the things that distinguishes it, right? You don't get this from movies, you don't get this from video games, you don't get this from music. You're interacting with physical pieces, and the more that we can use that to enhance the way a game is sort of supposed to feel, I think the better. I don't know what that means in terms of going forward. There are some interesting examples of this recently. This is not exactly, but it's in the same ballpark. One of the things that Lord of the Rings Duel does is it has this track that represents the hobbits and the Nazgul, and it's just two pieces of acrylic that slide on top of each other, but it kind of recreates the idea of a Nazgul chasing a hobbit on this visual track. And that's a fun component to interact with that also brings out the theme. And that's kind of the thing I'm kind of getting at. If you have cool interactive pieces that are both enhancing something either visually, thematically, or something that the game is supposed to be evoking, that's super cool. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more games doing that, and I would just like to see that becoming more prominent in board game design.
I like that. The way you frame that is interesting. The fact that, what differentiates board games from other types of media is the fact that there's a tactility to it, and then maybe we should be leaning into that tactility by sort of accentuating that factor of board games. I like that.
I know it's not for every game, right? Some games are going to be riding more on mechanics than anything else.
Sure.
For the right game, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll feed into the old man of the group here by saying this is really one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Board Game Arena, Tabletop Simulator. I mean, Tabletop Simulator is an important tool for playtesting, but those are never going to be my preferred ways to play a board game, because you're missing the tactile feel.
Yeah. Well, that brings me on to my trend that I want to see. I'd like to see an expansion of Board Game Arena. I'm just kidding. No, mine is actually, given how revolutionary Mike's was and how interesting Nealon was, that's a lot of pressure on you, Kellen. But mine is a little bit on the boring side. Mine is something I sort of touched upon. We've touched upon maybe on this episode already. I'd like to see a move away from mid-weight samey Euros. This was, again, sort of brought to stark relief for me in playing Key Market. I'd like to see a move to the Knizia style, low rules, high decision games. When I think of these kinds of games, I think of designers like Knizia, like Fries, like Wallace, like Whirly, just games that we're sitting down to a board game, and it's nice to have that shared language, but I like to just sit down and feel like, okay, this is going to be a fresh take. This is going to be something from a designer, from a unique mind, at a unique angle, and it's just not going to be the same old thing. So just I guess summarizing would be lower rules, higher decisions, and just unique takes on what board games have to offer in terms of the mechanics and how we actually play them.
Good thing you didn't go to Essen this year, Mark.
Oh, really?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
It was the year of the midweight Euro.
Oh.
Okay. So I don't know. I'm going to need help getting there, but I figure with three people smarter than me, we're going to get there. I was thinking about how Puerto Rico and Castles of Burgundy had their sort of moment back on Kickstarter with their $400 edition. And then I was thinking about how video games are currently in the era of remake, redo. I would say is a pretty defining, and again, that's a part of a larger market. I'm not meaning to say anything negative. My trend or hypothesis is that we are about to hit peak that in the board game space, which is a ton of remakes and redos and reimplementations of games from 25 years ago to a certain era, but my sort of hot take is that it will skip an era of like the beginning of Kickstarter, which is to say that those games have not aged as well as the games that have come both before and after. And again, we'd have to find like the right years to gate this around, but that's to say that the nostalgia for, games like Tikal and going way back to like El Grande is going to supersede that sort of first thrust of Kickstarter in the 2014 to 2020 range. And so, we may see remakes, redos within that range, but my guess is we'll see a lot more ancillary to that set of years. And then that will only continue as publishers look for surefire hits, as opposed to taking flyers on like new IPs or properties.
That said, I would be very interested in the premium $400 version of I Made You a Mixtape. Just put that on the record. Like,
Well,
that game aside,
ask you shall receive. I think it's interesting you say that, Kellen, because it made me kind of realize something that I hadn't considered before, which is that these games that are being brought back in these deluxeified, super expensive versions are games that weren't on crowdfunding to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think of the earliest game, the first one that comes to my mind is Alien Frontiers, right? I think that was the first Kickstarter game that made a significant amount of money. And there's really no nostalgia for that I'm aware of, right? I mean, I know they put out...
Rocket Dice. They don't roll straight, but I love them.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, talk about novelty. They're definitely not the same thing as bullet dice. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I don't think that there's going to be as much call for games that were on crowdfunding to begin with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like they already had their deluxe edition, so to speak. I think, that's yours is the positive spin on it. My negative spin is that the games were just again, but there's just something, I don't know. It's a weird time, I feel like, where there's a lot of people who are just like, I only play old games. It's only good if it's El Grande or older, and then we're still pumping them out at just such an insane rate. So I'm like trying to find like where we're headed with the crystal ball here. I don't know.
I think some of that is also from my perspective, and I know that I'm probably biasing this a little bit to when I entered the hobby, but it's around 2010, 2011. So that's where the big Kickstarter stuff really starts to come to the forefront, right? Around that time. Like, so there is from my perspective, this big gulf between my entry and like what I perceive as a lot of modern board game hobbyists' entry into the hobby, which is in the 2010s and later, versus like old school, lack of a better word, board gamers. And I do think that what the result of that is you get to hear like, oh man, nothing is ever going to be as good as these games that we were playing. Like stuff like El Grande, which, is legitimately fantastic and people talk about with a huge deserved amount of reverence, but that people that came into the hobby late don't have that experience of like having played when it was new. You just hear about this game El Grande and then you go out and you go find yourself this like, or I guess that is one of the ones that does have a reprint now, but like you go yourself a copy of that game and you like, oh wow, this game is really, really good. So there is this very clear, like in my mind, like wall between games now and games then. And I think that is kind of where a lot of that maybe healthy, maybe unhealthy mining of the past is coming from.
Yeah, I think, Neelan, you're 100% right that this train of thought was kicked off by us discussing this in the Patreon channels. I hadn't connected it until now, but it was like specifically like El Grande came out in 1995. I think I first played it in 2005.
Right.
And I would say it was as popular in 2005 as it is now, or more popular because there were just a lot less games.
Absolutely.
But sort of your position that like, well, was it popular in 1995? And we'll never know because we were all in diapers, except for Mike DiLisio.
To be clear, like, I'm not even like making that connection to like, even hash up into that conversation. Just to say that it is kind of the same idea, which is that there is some big benefit of hindsight. People's like, hey, let's pick let's get Ra, let's get El Grande, let's get Puerto Rico, all these like gems of years past and bring them back for players that never had the chance to experience them new,
Yeah. Which, I mean, to whatever degree is now what a publisher like Bitewing is attempting to do, really specifically like with one. Here are underappreciated Reiner Knizia games, and we're going to polish them and make them cool and put them on Kickstarter. So it's pretty interesting.
Okay, let's move on to the next quick little topic, which
the last topic, Neelan.
Sorry. Let's approach the end of our golden path, our golden journey, our vision. Let's cast our mind to the far end of the tunnel that we're all rapidly approaching as visionaries in this grand hobby that is board gaming, and talk about themes that we'd like to see. See, I don't know if that worked, but okay.
It worked. We loved it. I don't know. I was like, where did this Nealon come from? It's so good.
I tell you, I'm fired up.
Mike, want to kick us off again?
Sure. I'm just going to say I love water-themed games, but I feel like a lot of times they're pretty narrow in what they're trying to do. I want to see one about specifically deep sea exploration, like something in the Mariana Trench. I would love something like that.
Wild, because this actually really connects with mine. And I would say, if you've not played Endeavor Deep Sea, you absolutely should play that. That is exactly the game you're describing.
Ah, okay.
But mine broadly is kind of not the sea specifically, but like scientific exploration as like a theme. And like I think like games like Endeavor Deep Sea, stuff like Search for Planet X is kind of doing this like almost real world science as a frontier to explore. And I find that fascinating as well, like kind of in my world outside of board gaming as well. And I'd love to see more of that stuff in board games.
Simpatico, Nealon, simpatico.
I was worried this was going to go to like a Shape of Water, wanting to sleep with water monsters, and I was a little concerned.
Interesting, that's where your mind goes, Kelvin. Okay.
Well, you brought it up first, Mike.
I really don't think I mentioned sea love at any time. I just was talking about exploration.
Shifting gears quickly, I'm going to go with mine. I liked The Networks, that game by Gil Hova, where you were putting together a television station, and I'd like to see something in that vein, maybe production of a theater, like a play or something, or a movie production where you're putting the cast together. I know Knizia has his bidding game, the Hollywood Blockbuster or whatever, but something more thematic where you're, getting talent and getting a script and something like that. So theater or movie production would be the themes I'd like to see more of.
That's really funny. My second choice was going to be a game, and I was thinking of The Networks too.
Oh, okay.
But of doing a podcast.
Okay.
That was my second choice. Yeah.
Okay, I think mine is boring, and I'm just curious to get more like normie's perspective. Okay, you're confirmed. It's like I've been watching a lot, and again, I'm in the corporate world, but I've also been watching a lot of these movies and shows where it's like it's at a hedge fund, it's people doing their corporate job, and it's like super cutthroat and aggressive and mean, but it's like corporate like warfare, and it just feels like Yeah, exactly. It feels like an undermined area where like people are pretty nasty to each other. Tensions are really high. There's a lot of money on the line, and it's like it feels way underused. But then I wonder if like that's just the world that I kind of exist in now as like a corpo man. Unfortunately, like does that not sound intriguing to you guys?
The thing is, I guess it's like I feel like that theme exists in kind of a more abstract way, but there is that specific thing you're talking about where it becomes like the head-to-head, like very brutal, like negotiation side of it that I think is good open water.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like stock market or market manipulation games that can be mean.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like what you're talking about. You're talking about specifically, I think, kind of the corporate environment and how it breeds this kind of competition and aggressiveness,
like the board, corporate takeovers, like people doing their job super well, and the Trent Reznor soundtrack is playing, and they're writing really strongly worded emails. I don't know. I guess it's hard to make that into a board game, but it just feels like
almost sounds like a perfect theme for your sub 2 hour diplomacy game.
That's true. Just make it. Be the change you want to see in the world.
That's correct.
I think that is going to wrap us up with our grand visions of the future of board games. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode. Thank you, Mike DiLisio, for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being a fellow vanguard with the three of you, shining a light on the world of board gaming for all to follow.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Mike, one more time, please give us the rundown on I Made You a Mixtape one more time, if you don't mind.
Yes, it's going to be launching on October 28th on Kickstarter. Very excited about it. You're kindly going to be putting a link to the Kickstarter page in your show notes, so you can check that out. You can go to massiveasterisk.com if you want to. I'll give you a little information about it as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What is on your mind, kid? And goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right. I've already forgotten Mike's
Fandango,
color. Really?
Oh.
Dango.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
That obviously gets cut. That gets cut.
That gets cut and
We did
added
it
to the
properly.
end. Cut and added to the end.
No.
Clip.